The night began like any other in the last 5 years of my life, empty, silent, and full of regrets. It was Halloween 2019, and while families were getting ready to go trick-or-treating, I found myself sitting in my small one-bedroom apartment on the east side of town, looking out the window at decorations that others had hung with such care. The smiling jack-o'-lanterns seemed like a cruel mockery of my mood. It had been exactly 3 years since my wife Margaret had packed her things and left, taking with her not only her belongings, but also any hope I had left of reconciling with my 2 adult children. "You're a bitter man, Robert," she had told me that last night, "and I can't keep living in your shadow of negativity." Her words still echoed in my mind like sounds in an empty cathedral. The problems had started years before, when I lost my job at the auto factory. After 25 years of loyal service, the company decided to move production to Mexico, and men like me, over 50, weren't exactly what employers were looking for. Our savings ran out quickly, bills piled up like autumn leaves, and little by little I watched my marriage crumble under the weight of financial pressure and my growing depression. Margaret worked double shifts as a nurse to keep us afloat, but I had become a stranger in my own home, spending entire days without speaking, lost in a sea of self-pity and resentment toward a world that seemed to have abandoned me. My children, Sarah, 28, and Michael, 25, gradually stopped visiting us. At first I thought it was normal young adults, building their own lives, but I soon realized it was something deeper. During family dinners, when we still had them, I had become that person who only talked about how bad everything was, how the country was going to hell, how the new generations didn't understand the value of hard work. Sarah told me directly, "One day, Dad, being with you is exhausting. All you do is complain and criticize. You're no longer the man who taught me to ride a bike and read me bedtime stories." Her words hurt me more than any physical blow, because I knew she was right. If you're feeling the same way I felt that night, write "Lost Hope" in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel because this story is just beginning, and you won't want to miss what happens next. After the divorce, I tried to rebuild relationships with my children, but the damage was already done. Michael had moved to California to work for a tech company, and Sarah lived only 20 minutes away, but she might as well have been on another planet. My phone calls became less and less frequent, and when I finally dialed their numbers, the conversations were tense and full of uncomfortable silences. "Hi Dad, how are you?" "Fine, honey. And you?" "Fine too." "Hey, I have to go. We'll talk soon." And so, week after week, month after month, until I stopped calling altogether. Pride, that damn trait I had inherited from my father, prevented me from admitting that I needed help, that I was lost and scared. The neighbors in my new apartment building started treating me strangely after the first year. At first I thought it was my imagination, but gradually I realized there was something more. Mrs. Henderson from apartment 3B stopped greeting me in the hallway after her cat mysteriously disappeared the week after I moved in. The young couple from 2A started crossing the street when they saw me coming. Even the mailman, an older man named Frank who had worked in the neighborhood for decades, started leaving my mail on the floor instead of handing it to me. "There's something weird about that man," I heard him tell Mrs. Henderson one day. "Since he arrived, strange things have been happening in the building," and they were right in a way. It seemed that wherever I went, things went wrong. At the supermarket, cash registers broke down when it was my turn. At the bank, computer systems failed just as I reached the window. Traffic lights turned red when I approached. Buses left just before I could board them, and rain started falling every time I went out without an umbrella. It was as if the universe had decided I was its personal target for a cruel and endless, cosmic joke. I began to believe that maybe I really was cursed, that I had done something terrible in a past life and was now paying for it. Loneliness had become my constant companion. Nights were the worst, when the silence of the apartment became so thick I could feel it pressing against my chest like a heavy blanket. I had developed strange routines to fill the void. I talked to the television as if news anchors could hear me, made coffee for 2 people even though I knew I'd be alone, and sometimes dialed random phone numbers just to hear another human voice, even if it was to tell me I had dialed the wrong number. Weekends were especially brutal, watching families walk past my window, laughing and enjoying the life I had lost. I had tried looking for work, but at 62, In an economy that valued youth and technology over experience, I found myself competing with people half my age and twice my energy. The interviews were humiliating. Young human resources managers who looked at me as if I were a relic from the past, asking me about computer skills I had never needed in my 25 years at the factory. "We'll get back to you," they always said, but that call never came. Eventually, I stopped trying and started living off my small pension and what savings I had left, carefully calculating every expense, every meal, every bill. Depression had settled into my life like an unwanted tenant who refuses to leave. Some days I didn't have the energy to even get out of bed, and I spent hours staring at the ceiling, thinking about all the wrong decisions I had made, all the missed opportunities, all the words I should have said and never did. I had lost weight, not by choice, but because cooking for one person seemed like a monumental effort, and I often settled for a can of soup or a peanut butter sandwich. My reflection in the mirror showed me a stranger, a gaunt man with sunken eyes and an unkempt beard that had grown more from neglect than by design. That particular Halloween night, I had decided to go for a walk, not for pleasure, but because the four walls of my apartment felt like a prison. The streets were full of costumed children running from house to house, their laughter filling the cold October air. Parents followed them at a safe distance, chatting among themselves, creating that sense of community I had lost long ago. I stopped in front of a particularly well-decorated house, with skeletons hanging from trees and orange lights blinking in the windows. A family was just coming out, father, mother, and two small children dressed as superheroes. The father saw me standing there and quickly took his wife's hand, whispering something in her ear before quickly walking away with their children. I continued walking through the familiar streets I had once traveled with my own family, remembering the Halloweens when Sarah and Michael were little. Sarah always insisted on being a princess, no matter how many times we suggested other costumes, and Michael changed his mind about his costume until the last minute, causing frantic runs to the costume store. Margaret and I took turns accompanying them, and afterward, when we returned home with bags full of candy, we sat in the living room while they meticulously sorted their treasures, trading candies and negotiating like little diplomats. Those memories now hurt me more than they comforted me, reminding me of everything I had lost through my own stubbornness and negativity. As I walked, I began to notice that people really were avoiding me. It wasn't my imagination when I approached groups of parents waiting for their children. Conversations stopped and they moved away. A group of teenagers standing on a corner dispersed when they saw me coming, as if my mere presence was contagious. Even small children, who were normally curious and friendly, hid behind their parents' legs when I passed. It was as if I carried an invisible sign that said danger or stay away. The realization that I had become that person, the lonely stranger parents warn their children about, hit me like a punch to the stomach. You know what I'm talking about, don't you? Sometimes life makes us feel invisible. Subscribe to the channel because the best part of this story is coming next. I reached downtown, where there would normally be more activity, but even there people seemed to avoid me. Stores were closing early because of Halloween, and the streets were gradually emptying. I sat on a bench in front of the old fountain that had been there since I was a child, remembering how I used to bring Sarah and Michael here on Saturday mornings to feed the pigeons. The fountain no longer worked. It had been turned off years ago due to budget cuts, and now it was just another reminder of how good things eventually fade and die. The October wind blew through my thin coat, and I realized I had started shivering, not just from the cold, but from the deep loneliness that consumed me from within. That's when I heard the music. At first I thought it was my imagination, because I had been so lost in my dark thoughts that the outside world had become blurred. But gradually, the melody became clearer. Someone was playing an acoustic guitar somewhere nearby. The music was soft and melancholic, but there was something about it that caught my attention, something I hadn't felt in years. I got up from the bench and followed the sound, walking slowly down Main Street until I saw a young man, maybe about 30, sitting on the steps of the old public library with a guitar in his hands and an open case at his feet with some scattered coins. The street musician wasn't what I expected. He wore simple but clean clothes, worn jeans, a flannel shirt, and a leather jacket that had seen better days. His brown hair was a little tousled by the wind, and he had a short, well-groomed beard. But what caught my attention most were his eyes. They were kind and wise, as if he had seen a lot of the world despite his youth. He was playing an instrumental version of The Sound of Silence by Simon and Garfunkel, and his interpretation was so beautiful and moving that I stopped a few meters away, not wanting to interrupt but unable to walk away. For the first time, in months, maybe years, I felt something other than pain or emptiness. I felt a connection to something beautiful. I stood there for what seemed like hours, though it was probably only a few minutes, listening as he played song after song. I recognized some old Bob Dylan ballads, some Johnny Cash, even a soft version of John Lennon's Imagine. Each note seemed to touch something deep inside me, something that had been buried under years of bitterness and self-pity. When he finished Imagine, he looked up and saw me standing there. Instead of the expression of discomfort or fear I had seen on so many other faces that night, he smiled at me, a genuine, warm smile that reached his eyes. "Is there any song you'd like to hear?" he asked, and his voice had the same kind tone as his music. For a moment, I couldn't speak. It had been so long since someone had spoken to me with genuine kindness that I had forgotten how to respond. Finally, I managed to say, "What you're playing is beautiful. I don't want to interrupt." He laughed softly and said, "You're not interrupting me at all. In fact, it's nice to have company. Most people rush by, especially on Halloween. I guess a guy with a guitar isn't as exciting as ghosts and goblins." He introduced himself as David, and when I told him my name, there was no judgment in his eyes. None of that look I had come to know so well, the look that said there's something wrong with you. There was only acceptance. David started playing again, this time Mad World by Gary Jules, and tears began rolling down my cheeks before I could stop them. The song perfectly captured how I had felt for years, lost in a world that had become strange and inhospitable. When he finished, he asked if I was okay, and for the first time in years, I told someone the truth. I told him about Margaret, about my children, about how I had lost everything that mattered due to my own bitterness. I told him about the neighbors who avoided me, about the feeling of being cursed, about the endless nights of loneliness. He listened without judging, nodding occasionally, and when I finished, he said something that changed my perspective forever. "You know, sometimes the biggest curse is the one we put on ourselves." David told me his own story while he continued, playing softly. He had been addicted to drugs for years, had lost his job, his apartment, had even been homeless for a while. "I thought the world was against me," he said, "but eventually I realized I was my own worst enemy. Music saved me, not just playing it, but sharing it with others. Every time I play here on the street, I'm not just earning a few coins to eat. I'm reminding myself that I can still create something beautiful, that I can still connect with other human beings." His words resonated with me in a way I hadn't experienced in years. Here was someone who had hit rock bottom and found a way back up. That night, David and I talked until the streets were completely empty, and the Halloween decorations seemed less threatening and more whimsical. He gave me his phone number and invited me to come listen to him play whenever I wanted. "Music is better when it's shared," he said. When we finally said goodbye, I felt different, not cured, not magically transformed, but hopeful for the first time in years. I walked back to my apartment with his melodies still playing in my head, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel completely alone. That Halloween night, when I thought I was cursed forever, a street musician had shown me that maybe, just maybe, there was still hope for me. What do you think about this story? Have you ever felt like everything was against you, only to discover that sometimes we are our own worst enemies? Leave your opinion in the comments, subscribe to the channel, and don't miss our next exciting story that will touch your heart, just like this one did.